Thank you, Dave. It's a real pleasure to follow up on Bruce's comments, and I think you have a pretty good idea where he's coming from and really where we're headed as a university. I think Gordon phrased it well a few years ago when he talked about the one university theme. And that's really, when you look at these discovery themes that Bruce talked about, that's really that vision put into practice. What I'll be doing is talking about that a little more directly from the perspective of the themes within the college that Dave put up on the board, and we'll go through some aspects of some of the metrics in there. And then we'll come back to some of the themes that you see around the room that are displayed as part of the annual report process that we do. And I think all of those fit very well back together, and I think as you listen to what I have to say, it'll fit very nicely within the things that Bruce has already brought forth. Well, I'm going to start by saying that there are some things that we do that are important to holistically to the environment in which we live. Last year, the campus here in Columbus was named a tree campus, and Jim Chatfield and Mary Maloney did a great job of leading that venture and getting Ohio State named as a Tree Campus USA. And if you know Jim Chatfield very well, Jim is not content with finishing up a project before he's already got a couple of others going. So just this last week, we had an announcement that as well, the Worcester campus is also named as a Tree Campus USA. And you see a picture that has Ken Cochran in it, and Jim and Ken Cochran worked on that as well. So Mary with the Chadwick Arboretum, Ken with Sechrist Arboretum. So we had a ceremony on that last Saturday, but the point of it is that this university is one of 6 universities that has multiple campuses that are considered tree campuses. So that's something that I think is a very important part of the environment in which we live, and I wanted to bring that out in my comments. I also wanted to say, just with a few comments, that we've had some tremendous contributors to our sciences over the years, and we've had over 200 years of really valued contributions in transition this last year, and these are a list of faculty that have chosen to retire, and they're not all of them within the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, but all of them are faculty that have been supported through the OARDC research line. And we thank all of these people for all they've contributed. Now, I do know there's a couple on there that may have retired in name, but will continue to contribute, and that's fine. The university's real good about allowing people to continue to contribute whether we pay them or not. So, and the counter to that, of course, is that one of the great things about universities is that there's always a renewal stream, and so I also want to welcome several people, including our past speaker here, to the faculty here at Ohio State. And these are the people that will help leadership, open up new areas of opportunity, and certainly participate with the new ideas through the students that they bring into their programs. I've always felt that that's one thing that sets universities apart from any other structure that we have in society, is that you have this constant turnover of ideas and renewals. You have bright people coming in with new ideas and contributing to even themes that we've set out there that we are moving along on a trajectory. So we always have that infusion that's helping us with that process. And then we've also had quite a few changes within the academic leadership. and some of these names have already been stated, but I think it's important to put these people up here as well. Many of them are carrying on a lot of the academic missions they've done and are doing that as well as providing interim leadership within their units. But these are the people that translate to the individual faculty what are going on and also bring to the administration those areas that we need to really have focus on if we're going to go the directions that we want to. So I hope that you'll really take a little time and tell these individuals how much you appreciate what they're doing, because they do make a tremendous difference in our daily lives. I'm going to transition a little bit. Bruce talked about facilities and he talked about directions we're going with those, and there's no question there's some major ones there. We have a couple of things that we brought online within the last year, and I'll just point to those. We've got a couple of others that are in transition. I don't have, for example, a picture of our horse facility, but Bruce and Ron Kensinger are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how you put a roof over a horse. So we've got that going on out at Don Scott. And facilities in general. As Bruce said, we've got to have 21st, if not 22nd century facilities, and we have to have the concomitant equipment that goes along with that in order for you to meet your objectives as individuals and as a group. This happens to be a bioproducts pilot plant. We have a number of pilot plants on the campus here in Columbus, primarily in the food science and technology department, that are just excellent. This is in another one of our theme areas with the bioproducts. And just simply to tell you that this is a unique facility. It's going to give us a lot of opportunities to do things that we've talked about but haven't had the ability to do that. In the upper, what'll be your right-hand corner, shows some of the plastic products, the latex products that come out of our ability to take different products and extract latex and other compounds out of those. We're also, and I hope by the time I'm finished giving these presentations, I quit talking about the effects of the 2010 tornado, but we are really at a point where we're moving into constructing the last of the bigger facilities that are vestiges of that impact. So this is the lot area where the Ag Engineering building was located in Worcester, and this is a head house area in behind Williams, and I'll show you a picture in a moment where a greenhouse complex will go. So the tornado came through here. The progress is that the building that was duct taped together is no longer there. And then in a few weeks, we will be having a groundbreaking to replace that building, and the representative structure of what that will look like externally is shown here. That's pretty key, particularly for a lot of the work that we do in the bioproducts area, and really has the work that's gone on in that area, along with primarily the scientists with our Ag Engineering group, has really supported a number of third frontier ventures over the years. So we'll be very pleased to get people back in their rightful home as we move forward. And we don't have the pictorial drawing at this point, but at the top of this picture, this is that head house complex behind Williams, and this will show what that greenhouse complex will look like. So the point of this part is that as we move along the trajectory that Bruce talked about, we would hope by the summer, next summer, that this complex will be finished, and by the end of the 2014 calendar year, we'll have the Ag Engineering building completed. And so those will really, again, underpin the capacity of what we have. The other thing that we do is we provide some site-specific research areas around the state, And I did want to point out there, just as in some of our academic homes, we have some transition in leadership at these locations. It's very important. In the upper right, Matt Hoflick will be providing managerial oversight for our muck crops branch, which is a organic soils area, as well as for the North Central Outline Research Station. Bob Philbrin has been recruited out of North Carolina and will be the on-site manager for that location. This last year out at Western, Joe Davlin was named as the permanent manager out there. Joe's doing a great job. We really appreciate the things he's doing. And then another area that's in transition really for the whole university and has been a topic of considerable discussion is what we do at Coshocton. And so this budgetary framework that Bruce was talking about, it's not only Ohio State that's adjusting to some of those things, but one of our partners in a lot of activities, USDA, Agricultural Research Service, has also made transitions. And one of them was that they moved to close the location at Coshocton. Well, the issue there is you've got 50 years of environmental research there with a tremendous record that's cataloged and recorded that can be used. And so the university is in discussions with the federal government about transitioning that. Jim Buxton is the person that is leading our work there, providing an opportunity for the ongoing research projects that continue to this day, even though the management aspect of that is still in discussion. Bruce talked about the budget, and I put this in here primarily because I get asked about it, whether I'd put it in or not. And I'll just simply indicate that there's a lot of things that we can talk about as Bruce has indicated. One is that, you know, if you look at the provisions that come from the state or the federal government, fundamentally they underpin the facilities pieces that we've talked about, but they also provide us to have the faculty and students that we have to address the mission areas that we have. By and large, the various programs, the various activities, the research outcomes that we talk about are really generated by the individual faculty. And so these are investments by the state and federal government are really leveraging activities in terms of that research enterprise. So if you think about most external grants, they run like a 3 to 5 year period. And so we have about $160 million in active grants over that timeline. In any given year, we're spending about $35 to $40 million in terms of direct expenditures on those activities. Now, as we move forward, we actually feel in a very what I might call constrained environment. We really feel pretty validated because of the things that Bruce was talking about earlier. And that is that as you go through a process, whether you're at the state or the federal level, you have an executive budget that then goes to your House, either at the state or at the federal level, eventually to the Senate. There's a reconciliation and then a final budget. So we're at the process right now at the state level that things have just gone through the House. They're moving over to the Senate. And so we feel very good in that you've gone from a budget out of the executive branch that was essentially considered to be a flat budget, one where the House puts us consistent with where the rest of higher ed, where Ohio State is going to be, and have projected us in at a 3.1% increase. The challenge that we have at the federal level is largely one of sequestration. If you look at the numbers there, sequestration is about a 5%. It's about 2/3 of what we'll see as a potential decrease in the FY13 budget. And the federal budget runs from September, in this case of September of 2012 to the end of September of 2013. But it's only been in the last few weeks that we've had that budget for this current year. And so there was some trimming that was done again in Congress from the executive budget on top of sequestration, and that total pool, and we're still working through absolute numbers, but in a round number, it is about 8%. There are some good aspects in there as well, though. One of those is that by the time those numbers sorted out, at least in terms of the competitive grant pool that we have, that the AFRI program, where a lot of you compete for funds, that's increased by about $30 to $40 million, and so it had almost a 5% increase, primarily by actions that were taken by the Senate at the end of their negotiations. So that's a good news aspect of this. The other part that sometimes gets left out of thinking of these things, because the budgets tend to go in these annual cycles, is that we also have farm bills that are supposed to turn over every 5 years. They tend to, by the time they go through the various machinations that we have, about every 7 to 8 years. The current farm bill that we have really lapsed in terms of its funding authority at the end of September of 2012. And as a result of that, we're running on continuing resolutions even with that. But there are mandatory programs in there that lapsed with that authority. If they're going to come back, they will come back as part of the new farm bill that we anticipate will probably occur sometime this fall. So the $140 million that I'm talking about there is nothing to do with any of the infrastructural support that we see. It's all, again, grant driven. So some of you have seen grant opportunities in the specialty crops area, the organics area, new farmers, ranchers, and in the bioenergy area. These were all mandatory programs that were authorized through the Farm Bill. So in one sense, the offset of seeing an increase in AFRI is at the same time there was a pretty big hit for a lot of the things that were done. And I would point out that one of the impacts of those is that by and large, this issue that Bruce talked about of building groups of faculty around an area to have a large impact, those programs, those mandatory programs were set up in a way that they really engendered that, not only within individual institutions, but across institutions. And I think it really starts to build some capacity for us nationally, of which, of course, the state of Ohio also benefits. Now, I also, representing the research end of things, I need to talk in terms of metrics, because I think that at the end of the day, that's the way we tend to measure a lot of the things that we do from a research end of things. And so these numbers are principally coming out of the Sponsored Programs Office, so they give you a quick way of referencing where the numbers come from. And right now, what I'm showing is where we are 3/4 of the way through the year. So the Q1-3 are the first 3 quarters of the current fiscal year, the 2013 fiscal year. So in the case of the university, that fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30th. So we're doing quite well on that. If you look at awards, they're projected to exceed $50 million at the end of this year. We've already exceeded $38 million in direct awards, and many of the programs, of course, have been somewhat delayed this year because of the sequestration dialogue. So some of the things we might normally see in this year might actually flow into the next year in terms of when those come through. We also see that the activities, whether you look at numbers of awards, if you look at the indirects, the F&A that's generated, all of these numbers are trending in an upward direction, and I'll show you a graph over time in just a moment. The other thing that Bruce mentioned was our activities in the area of technology and commercialization. And the university has really put some effort into consolidating a lot of the directions we've been going and really drawing the colleges into those discussions at a university level. So we've had investments in our industry liaison office, and there are primary investments in multiple colleges there that I think is having an impact. There's also been a large investment into TCO, technology and commercialization, in order to start pulling things together. And the information that we've just received from them, again, through the first 3 quarters, and you can look at that in comparison to FY12, is again, whether you're looking at revenue, you're looking at agreements, patents, new inventions, all of those numbers continue to trend upward. And I think this really goes back, again, to what Bruce is saying, that we have not only national, but we have world-class faculty here, and these are the results of the work that they're doing and the impact that'll have on society moving forward. So I tend to look through the filter of these primarily as an indication, not so much what those absolute numbers are, but in fact, are they moving in a direction that they're valued by society? Because at the end of the day, when you go back to the previous slide, why should the state, why should the nation invest in what we do? And it's really going to come back to this kind of information. Do they see a value proposition in their daily life? So if you take that information and you really look at that over the last decade, Bruce commented on the fact that we've more than tripled what we do in the way of expenditures annually over the last decade. And that's exactly what this line shows. Each of the little triangles and squares is where we were in a given year. And then we've just simply shown the regression line on that. So the darker line is the expenditure, direct expenditure, whereas the lighter line is the indirects or F&A. And they track each other almost directly, which tells you 2 things. One is there's more investment in the things that we're doing and more expenditures around that area of science. But it also tells you that by and large, we're doing really well when it comes to bringing those federal dollars back to the state of Ohio. If you look at that as a bar graph and you look at where those dollars are coming from, again referencing a lot of the priorities, yes, USDA is a primary area of investment, and probably close to 40% of the total. Looks as a little bit less here because if you look at the highlighted box at the bottom where it says colleges and universities, we've split that out, but probably about 2/3 of that part of the bar graph, which is on the bottom and you can see is increasing, is essentially subcontracts that are coming back. And you can parse that out, but about 2/3 of that would fall back under the USDA area. Again, what it talks about is this ability to build teams of people across institutions, across colleges is really critical in terms of generating resources. That's the reason we left it split out that way. The other one is really through primarily the Third Frontier effort, but through some other activities. For example, a lot of the things we do in our Natural Resource School, that's funded by different agencies, state agencies here in Ohio. There are monies that come through Department of Agriculture back into specific activities that we have in the college. So there's a big direct relationship with the things that the state needs attention to in there. But again, that's been a growing part of our portfolio as we go along as well. Total awards, the reason I put the awards in here as well as showing the expenditures is the expenditures by and large are a reflection of, in any given year, of the awards in the past. Because those are the things that are in play and that are going on. And the question you ask is, well, what's that trajectory moving forward? And always like to look at what the total awards are, because that's probably a projection of what those expenditures are apt to be in that next window of about 3 to 4 years. And again, that trajectory looks pretty strong, and also a lot of the things that were highlighted in the previous slide continue to be highlighted as areas where those dollars are coming from. I put this last one in primarily because in addition to metrics that we keep, we also have a series of metrics that across all of the colleges, again, going back to this one university concept, what are some of the metrics that the university is looking at as they gauge as a larger entity of where we're going? And so as you look at these categories over here, the first 3 or 4 of those categories are a little hard angle for me to see, but the first 3 or 4 of those are university categories that are being monitored. And then every college at Ohio State has the opportunity to add a couple of metrics to that list to enhance the flavor of what they're doing in their area. So one of the things as a metric, for example, is members of the National Academy of Science. And what the Provost Ludo had set up was a baseline year of 2011, and the question is, what's that target going to be in a 5-year period of window, and what kind of progress are you making on that? So we set up how we were monitoring those, and we've continued to refine that because this helps us focus as well in terms of how we define that information. And if you look at any of these areas currently, this would be, this is what was targeted originally, this is where we are currently within the year, and this is what we project as a full year. You'll see that we're making very good progress on these. I don't need to read each one of those. And you can say, well, what's this yellow light all about? Typically, if we look at things that we invest in, for example, our internal competitive grants program that we think really puts us in a position to compete both federally as well as to align with industry activities, when we look at that trajectory over a decade period of time, we've worked with about 150 different Ohio companies. But the issue for us is when you just keep adding on that list, it doesn't tell you where you are in a given period of time. So we've gone back and we've actually redefined that and said, what's our rolling 5-year average? Because that's kind of within the window of award period and usually a project period. When we do that, that drops us down a little bit from projecting where we're going. But from our standpoint, it gives us a better idea of where we are relative to that larger list that we keep. And to me, the interesting thing really out of that is we continue to work with about 2/3 of the partners that we were working with over that last 10 to 15 year period. So I feel really good again about the trajectories, about what this allows us to say about what we're doing, and hopefully it gives Bruce some nice things to talk about when he goes over for his annual discussion. So we're going to transition a little bit now away from the numbers and go a little bit more into the context of those numbers. I think most of you have seen the annual report. If you haven't, if you don't have one, we have a few around here we can give to you. If we don't have one, we'll get your name and get one to you. Because a lot of the stories are the ones then that are highlighted around here, and I'm going to rephrase a few of them, but rephrase them within the context of the strategic areas of the college, because when you look at what we're doing with those metrics, and when you look at the title of what I've said that I would talk about, it's really an issue of, okay, if you take that alphabet and you look at that total alphabet of the things we're doing, how do we project that to people both internally and externally in saying these are the areas that we stand for? And by and large, most people, if you start listing the departments that make up the college, that doesn't really help them any. That doesn't tell them necessarily what you do. So the nice thing about the strategic areas of the college is it gives you the context of this is the delivery, these are the areas that we're focused in, and these are the areas that we say that we're going to contribute to. So what I'm going to do is highlight a few of those things, and I want you to think about those in that context, and then I'm going to add a few other comments about the way that we're trying to think about those as we continue to develop that elevator speech that we have as we talk to people externally as well. So one of those is the theme of the conference today. I don't really need to go into any of the detail on this because you'll be hearing from people like Steve Clinton and Steve Schwartz later today. But the reality is that if you listen to what they're talking about and the areas that they're emphasizing, just know in this whole area of food security, production, and human health, you're talking about a continuum, and you're talking about a continuum all the way from the basic sciences where we're looking at gene structure, we're looking at how those genes function in an environment. Some of those get applied in our breeding programs. For example, in this case, Dave Francis's tomato breeding program. And those go back in many different ways as you start driving this process. We're asking science-based questions and we're trying to pull those things together, but they have a lot of implications. And one of those, as you look at health-promoting aspects in a tomato, that also has big implications in our industry in the state, because as we look at both fresh and processing tomatoes, we're looking at how we create a competitive edge relative to other markets nationally and internationally. And so these become quality factors that are very important to us. Yes, there are some other aspects that eventually will lead to commercialization as well that have to do with health promoting activities. I will let that story continue later today. I need to build a similar kind of slide as we talk about our environmental area. And we have a lot of great stories in there. We have some major challenges in our state that will take good science to address. And in that process, we will build out that same kind of story that I showed you in the previous slide. So this particular story is just looking at what we're dealing with in terms of water and water quality. As Bruce indicated, that's going to be a grand challenge over this next decade. And so what role do we play in that? What role do we play from a natural resource standpoint? What role do we play from an agricultural standpoint? And who are the partners that are necessary to get around the table and do this? This happens to be one story in terms of how we can tie up phosphorus with gypsum. And it's a very important part of that story as we start putting mitigation practices into place. We know in the last 2 decades we've seen more invasive species really affecting our landscape than we saw in the previous 100 years. And the reason for that is we clearly are in a national, international, global trading environment. Good part of that is that if you have things that you value, that you can get to those pretty readily on any given day of the week or any month of the year because of that global trade. The downside to that is there's always a series of hitchhikers in that process. And so a lot of these things are coming in the crating material when things are being transported in. The example here is the emerald ash borer. Again, the point is you have a lot of basic science that's going on, but that science then is getting applied back into the environment that affects us. This shows Dan Herms, but Dan is working with people in the Agricultural Research Service as they look at hybrid trees using Asian ash as the background to get some resistance into that population. And those are, the outcomes of those are being evaluated right now as they're playing it out. This is not a slowing stream. We continue to have these across the spectrum of the sciences that we deal with. One of the additions that allows us a competitive advantage in terms of looking at these things was a facility that was just dedicated in the last year. That's the PAR facility. And what that allows us to do, at least as I look at it, instead of reacting to something like that emerald ash borer, when we saw it come in through the Port of Detroit, as we saw it move across the landscape in Michigan, and we waited as that came in, or as Dan and others made their trips up to where it existed, this allows us to proactively start working at those things where our science laboratories are located and get a head start on addressing those. There's not a shortage of those kinds of activities. And again, this facility allows us to bridge with other sciences, both within the university, but also across the Midwest as we develop those relationships in more depth. And I put this one in because I think there's also some very interesting things, again, as you think about bringing new talent in, new ideas, how we're going to address some of these issues, and where does the funding for that come from? And this slide really talks about all of that. So this is Peter Pierre-Marini, a new faculty member in entomology, but he's funded with colleagues from around the country from the Gates Foundation. So that was not one of the list of places that I had on an earlier slide. But they're interested in some things that affect the world. And a lot of those are diseases that affect humans. But by and large, they also talk about how you vector diseases. And many of those are issues that are both state and national issues that we have as well. And this simply talks about can you mess up the kidneys in such a way that these mosquitoes are no longer able to continue to do their feeding and transmission cycle. Again, you go back to the facility that we put in place with the prior slide. This allows us to do some of those kinds of things, but it allows us to contribute really to the global society that we're trying to address. So the third area, we've talked now about the food area, we've talked about environmental area, and the third one that we really can talk about it in this theme of discovery to delivery is the bioenergy, bio-based products area. We'll have a chance to highlight some of that a little later. You'll see Yibo here, and Yibo is one of our faculty award winners this year. But again, you had that spectrum from the basic to the applied and getting that out into the commercialization stream. And the point here is that we're seeing activities that our faculty are involved in that are also already impacting that. So this company, Bio 100, it's in Mansfield, Ohio, and this shows Jeff Schultes, who's one of the leaders of that company, and they're using some of the foam that comes out of biosources, a lot of the technology that came out of Yibo's lab, in this case to be part of the foam headings that you see in the headrest of the car. But these foams can be anywhere from soft to very firm, and so they can actually go into other components of cars and other parts of things that we use in our daily life. Now, the last area, and again, as I close this, I really think it is important to recognize, again, this issue of the global theme of the things that our faculty are involved in. And we need to also make up a slide that talks about this trajectory of science and the application of that science, which we have the pieces and we just need to put that together. So this shows Golang Wang. Golang, again, you'll hear more about his work a bit later this afternoon. And it's really an important issue because you say, well, how much rice do you grow in Ohio? What you really ought to ask this question is, how much do monocots contribute to the environment that we live in, because the kinds of things he's doing, the way you take and develop genomic libraries of information and then apply that, really cuts across a pretty broad spectrum. And again, he has a team of people he works with internationally and nationally, but also there's a growing population of people in Ohio State that are contributing to that population of work as well. Another international area, this shows Linda Safe, and it talks about gut malnutrition. But you know, a lot of the things that we do, we may start off, for example, looking at a vaccine development and looking at in a food animal. But quite frankly, the vaccine is probably against a strain of a particular organism that has other strains that affect humans. And so as we understand that, and again, as we start working across this one university, that we're so blessed to have both a situation where you have ag college, engineering, medicine, veterinary medicine, all of these all on one location, it allows us to really get a better idea of where these things are. So in this particular case, one of the things they're finding is that nutrition is a really important aspect of how well these vaccines work. That has tremendous implications in terms of trying to deliver something and understand how that's going to work in a population. So another great example of how our understanding of basic science has broad applications to our world society. And then I just will finish by saying that Bruce talked about leadership in a lot of areas. I'll just indicate that the first grant from AID and the Feed the Future initiative was made to a group of universities, of which Ohio State provided leadership. And Mark Urbaugh is the lead PI on that, and it's really focused around food sustainability in Tanzania, but the things that are being looked at have broad implications across locations. And one of the things that started even prior to this particular grant, but has been built on by that, you see a program that Sally Miller has developed where she really is training people around the world on diagnostic techniques. So these things tend to blend together. We take the best of the best and package those in ways that make sense. And one of our obligations is to continue to be able to tell that story, as I say in that elevator speech, because quite frankly, we have a lot to say about what Ohio is going to look like in the future. It's a great place to live now, and quite frankly, we want it to continue to be that way in the future. So with that, I'll close, Dave.